Welcome to the Valiant podcast. Today we are looking at 1 Timothy 3 for the second time in verse 2. Last week we talked about being blameless, the husband of one wife, what all that means, and we didn't get further than that. Well, I guess we got to being able to teach.
Yeah, we finished verse 2.
Okay, we did finish verse 2. So we're going to start on verse 3 today, but before we do, thank you for watching. My name is David.
I am Jonathan.
We are believing brethren in the Lord and according to the flesh.
Hey, come on.
Did you like that?
Brothers, IRL,
Yep.
and not of this world.
You need another acronym for that.
Not.
Brothers, IRL, and ISL. In real life and in spirit life.
Hey, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with this podcast, we do verse-by-verse commentary discussion to help you grow in your faith. It's both fun and informative. We have a good time. I think we're going to have a good time today, too. What do you think, Jonathan?
Yes, we will have a good time.
So do you want to start reading?
No.
No?
My
All
throat's a little hoarse today,
True.
so you take it away.
Yeah. I don't even know why I asked. That's right. If you can't hear Jonathan today, you'll just have to listen a little harder. He's getting over something in his throat.
Sure am.
So verse 2 to start at the top says, a bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach. These are qualifications to be a pastor or an overseer of a church. We went over those. Verse 3 goes on to say, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous.
Do you want maybe just finish the sentence?
Okay. One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? And it's a semicolon, not a period. Not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil.
Oh, man. This is a juicer.
This is a juicer.
We're going to get through, 4 verses today?
Probably.
Is that a good goal?
Yeah.
Okay, so should we summarize what a pastor is?
Summarize what a pastor
Yeah,
is?
because we talked about it for like half an hour last time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good idea. So a pastor is someone who watches over and or oversees a group of believers, men, women, and of course their children, in a local church. And this, in my understanding, and we talked about this last time a little bit too, is that role of overseeing and pastoring includes what you might call small groups, assuming that the people in that group are committed to each other, learning the word, there's established leadership, so on.
Established leadership.
If you are overseeing a group of people, you are part of an established leadership, and you are teaching and trying to help disciple those people you are pastoring, and therefore you should meet these qualifications.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's good to set the
Agreed?
standard. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back here now.
Okay.
So we're looking at not given to wine. So they're obviously just not. So okay, this is actually a good. This is a good verse because obviously people in the Bible drink wine,
Right.
And there's obviously verses about that say like, drink a little bit of wine for it's good for your stomach. That one, right?
Right.
Do you have an opinion on this?
I do. Yeah, I think it's important to note that, especially in a biblical context, not given to wine is specifically about drunkenness or addiction. So some people would say, it's okay to drink, but not to be drunk. And certainly the Bible supports that, being that drunkenness is a sin. It's considered debauchery. But then there's also the opinion of being addicted to something or dependent on something, even though you might not necessarily be drunk all the time or at all, It's kind of like coffee, right? Like you could drink coffee every day, but be physically and mentally dependent on it so that you cannot go a day without your cup of coffee. And if you do go without it, you're like, you get like withdrawals, right? Like that's a real thing. And I think that violates the scripture personally, right? You could replace wine with anything, really. It's that you don't have a dependency on anything, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, whatever, so that you don't have any addictions, I guess, is a good way of putting it. You shouldn't have any addictions. Is one understanding that I have that or a standard I uphold personally for this passage and just for my own life as a leader. I don't want to have any addictions, right? So I'm not going to be dependent on anything. That goes in addition with the idea of drunkenness. So you should, of course, should not be drunk if you're talking specifically about wine or alcohol. You mentioned the verse that says, where Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy 5, drink not only water, but also a little wine for your stomach's sake and for your frequent infirmities. So this was a common thing in biblical times. One reason being that some speculate that Timothy had some issue going on with his stomach and he needed wine specifically as like a medicinal aid for that issue. That has relevance. But one of the reasons why drinking wine just across the common population was so customary for people in Jesus and the apostles' times was because without the methods of food preservation that we have today, like refrigeration and so on, food, whenever they would have meals together, especially gathering as a church, would sit out for hours and hours and hours and hours, and it grew a ton of bacteria. And so it was normal, commonplace for people to drink wine with every meal, largely with food that sat out for a while, because the wine would kill the bacteria so that you wouldn't get food poisoning from it. And so you were supposed to, actually, it was normal this way, to drink wine as you were eating, not to the point of drunkenness, but a little bit, because it was enough to kill the bacteria due to the alcohol content. So in that context of the biblical and historical times in which we're reading about, saying not given to wine was a matter of not being drunk and not being addicted to wine.
Because I drank it so much.
Exactly, right. But drinking it was so normal that it was just considered like any other beverage to us today, which is why I think it can also be applied to things like coffee and
I see.
Other things that we could become addicted to. Right?
Yeah, the connection is it's so normal to have coffee every day that someone could literally be addicted to coffee.
Right.
And then if that pastor doesn't have their coffee, then they're grumpy or whatever. That's not a good example.
Right.
I'm also thinking of, it'd be tough for a leader to have alcohol and have it not be a bad example, right?
Yeah. Yeah, this is where it gets more applicable to modern times, because like back then, nobody would have had a thought that like, oh, this guy's drinking wine, because like that's just what people did back then. Wine at like weddings, everything. Like you just drank wine. That was just a thing that you did. But in today's day and age, there is, at least in the Christian world, more situations where wine or alcohol, beer, whatever, is so taboo or even outlawed that seeing a leader, even if it's just, one glass of wine every once in a while, drinking would cause people to stumble. And I think that's why Paul does bring up in Romans 14, even in his day and age where wine was so common, to say that if drinking wine or eating meat causes my brother to stumble, I'll never again eat meat or never again drink wine. So even in Paul's day, it did come up occasionally where somebody would be offended or be caused to stumble by someone else drinking wine. And so even more so, I think that happens today because of the different cultural, understanding or approach to alcohol that we have today. And so as a general point, to keep it simple, the verse that Paul uses in Romans 14 becomes relevant, which is that if it's causing somebody to stumble and you're aware of it, you shouldn't do it. So the leader applying 1 Timothy 3, where it means not given to wine, of course means you should not be addicted and should not be drunk. But you should also consider, as an additional note, that not drinking wine at all might be additionally helpful for certain people that might be caused to stumble or emboldened to drink when they shouldn't, due to seeing you as a leader drinking wine or beer or whatever. Mm-hmm. I can't personally say to a leader that it's a sin for you to have a glass of wine or to have a can of beer, but the idea is that if you are doing that and you're not addicted and you're not becoming drunk, but then there's somebody else in your fellowship that is upset by seeing you do that, you're unnecessarily causing grief to a fellow believer, and I would want to avoid that wherever possible if it were me,
Yeah.
And that principle applies, of course, to lots of other things, like being overweight. It applies to drinking other beverages that people would find harmful, or unhelpful. There's lots of things we consume that could cause grief to someone else, and you just want to be aware of that.
And you would be aware just by knowing your congregation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I think that absolutely destroys those 3 words. We took it down.
Not given to wine.
Yeah, not given to Starbucks either.
Yeah, true. I mean, I'm kind of a Caribou guy now. Have you had their caramel crafted press? Bro,
Yeah.
this is not a
That's
sponsor.
just caramel syrup and some cold brew, bro. Come on.
But it's hot and it's creamy.
No, it's cold.
I get it hot.
You can get it hot?
Yeah, you get it hot. It's really good.
Oh, that actually.
It's like the best coffee.
That's actually
Oh, it's got this earthy tone to it.
not sponsored.
Not sponsored, but very good. If you're going to Starbucks, go to Caribou instead. Get their hot caramel
Come on,
crafted press.
I'm a Starbucks guy.
I don't know. Starbucks is a little progressive.
I will say their coffee's really bad.
Starbucks?
Yeah.
Oh.
Like their brewed coffee. It's not the best.
Oh, okay.
On
Maybe
the bottom of
Caribou's
the
better.
cup, there's always a little bit of grounds because they do like the instant machine,
Yeah.
so.
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, but they got good other stuff. Well,
Okay.
I have my opinions.
All right. Yeah, that's
Not
all right.
violent.
Not violent.
So, I mean, obviously we shouldn't be violent, but what's an example of a leader being violent?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think if there's any case where I've been violent. I mean, I think as an obvious example is like you shouldn't be hitting people. I don't know. I mean, like,
Can you imagine in your small group?
yeah, just somebody speaks out of turn, just punches them in the face.
Slaps
I don't
them
know.
on the back of the head.
I mean, it's closely connected to being temperate, self-controlled with your emotions. That ties into not being violent because you shouldn't be. I don't think you should be physically aggressive with people, nor should you be so emotionally uncontrolled that you start to get physical in any way. But I think this also, it's also I think in this passage is not to be quarrelsome. So you're not. I don't think you're going to be violent if you're also not quarrelsome. But if you are quarrelsome, I think you have a higher likelihood of being violent. So it's like, how do you treat arguments or discussions that could potentially become heated? And if you handle those discussions that have the potential to become heated in such a way that you lose self-control, get flustered, get angry, and not necessarily get physical, but at least get angry and start to react emotionally, I think that would be included in the context of being violent or lacking self-control or quarrelsome, however you put it. So you shouldn't be arguing with people, most definitely. You shouldn't be losing your control emotionally, and you absolutely should not be getting physical with anybody, unless you're like hanging out with the bros and you're wrestling or something, Yeah.
I don't know. It's odd that he would put violent as a word. Can you go back to the scripture? Because I want to compare it to the other ones. Because it's like, okay, given a wine makes sense, greed makes sense, gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetousness, but it's like, you don't think there's maybe something else? I don't know.
To being violent?
Yeah. It just is, it's an odd descriptor. Because you're right. I mean, it's basically a level above quarrelsome.
Right. Well, one thing that comes to mind that could be relevant is there's a passage in 1 Peter 5 where it says that you're not supposed to lead by compulsion, which is like forcing or coercing someone into following you, as well as feeling forced to lead when you don't want to. And so violence could be connected to coercion, where you're trying to force people to submit to you rather than leading by example and people following as a natural byproduct of living a good example, right?
That makes sense.
So violence could be a reference to that, like not necessarily physically hitting somebody and being quarrelsome in so doing, but more like trying to use force, whether it's physically or mentally or verbally abusive and on any level, to get someone to yield to you as a leader. Some would even say being manipulative could be applied to that. So that could be another layer
you could
to
say,
it.
What's that word? Like, exploiting someone or extorting someone or like anything like that. That could be connected to violence, right?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's sort of like, it's a very forceful form of leadership. It's very tyrannical, right?
Tyrannical.
And you would want to avoid that. And I think that probably has some connections to violence for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So the next one's greedy for money. This is a big one because obviously as a leader, you get money. We talked about this a little bit last time, I think, but it's sort of like you're not doing the church thing for money, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people miss the importance of this and what is ultimately a really simple interpretation of it, because some people will say, I mean, I think this applies too, that the leaders of the big ministries that have the big, $3 million house and they have the cars, or they have a private jet, or whatever, they wear the nicest clothes, or, they wear the Gucci brand when they, it's just like, does that apply? I think so. I think that you are going to be, unless you earned the money through your own labor outside of the church, people are going to criticize you as a leader for buying things that would be considered luxurious by the common man. And that just has a very negative connotation to it. But on a smaller scale, going into ministry for the money means you're greedy for money. And a lot of people will say, oh, no, I'm going into ministry for the kingdom of God because, I want to, I want to serve God. I want to do God's work. But then at the end of the day, the way that you know whether or not you're doing it for the money is, would you still do that work even if you were paid absolutely nothing? That's one way to sort of examine yourself. If suddenly, especially if you're currently a pastor, like if you're an existing pastor or leader right now, if suddenly all forms of financial support stopped right now, would you still keep doing what you're doing as faithfully as you were? And if you wouldn't, you're doing it for the money, or at least you are influenced by greed for money. Second thing you can do to examine yourself is, do you expect people to give to you? Is your attitude like having made people's generosity an expectation? The reason why I bring that up is because in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul says that he has a right as an apostle, because of what the Bible says, to receive contributions from the church for his work as an apostle. But he then says in the following verses, I have given up this right for two reasons. He says, number one, so as to not be a burden to the church. In other words, a leader should never be in a position where he is required to be paid, because then there's the potential for the church to be burdened by a paying staff when there might be other needs that are more urgent for a community. Second reason that Paul gave is, he said, if I am teaching on this right for leaders to be paid so that I can be paid, he says, my boasting has become void, and it would be better for me to die than to teach that way. So in other words, if teaching about the responsibility of a church to give is at all influenced by your desire to be given to, then all of your teaching about this topic has been voided, and you've become a bad example, influenced by greed, essentially. And that's a really tricky one, because how many leaders can say when they teach about tithing or giving or offerings or finances, generosity, how many pastors, when they teach on that, have zero desire while they teach on that to be given to? It's probably pretty rare to find a person like that, a leader like that. And so if, like Paul, you're in the position where you can teach on generosity without wanting people to be generous with you, and you are not at all expecting to be paid as a similar attitude, and you're not burdening the church with being paid, then it's okay for people to give to you as a leader. But if you're at all have issues regarding what I just mentioned, then I would consider that being greedy for money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what you said makes sense. I just have a couple of questions because it's extremely offensive. Because obviously the situation you explained is extremely common. Dare I say, normal. Mm-hmm. So my first question would be, what would you say to the pastor who, you mentioned, okay, if you were no longer paid, would you be okay with that? If not, you're greedy. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like, will that person pays his bills with his salary, for his wife and kids. So obviously he's not going to be able to do it as faithfully because he doesn't have any money without that. So I know what you're going to say, but what would you say?
Well, I would say it's the responsibility of the leader to examine what Scripture says about what to do in that situation, and that's to have another way of making money.
I see.
In work, Paul made tents. Peter and some of the apostles were fishermen. Jesus was a carpenter. Even some of Paul's companions were also tent makers, So it's just very telling that all of the apostles that you read about, at least that have any details about, in Scripture had another form of work, something else that they did to make money. And even in Acts 20, Paul tells the elders of the Ephesian church, he says, "You have seen in my laboring night and day that you ought to support the weak." So Paul told the elders, my example of working outside of ministry to provide for myself and those with me was an example to you that you need to support the weak in your community in the same way. So you provide for your own through your labor in the same way that I have provided for my own through my labor, is what Paul was teaching. So Paul's instruction to pastors, local pastors, was have another way to make money and make money that way outside of the church. Because otherwise what happens is you start to get attached to the donations that you get from the ministry or from church, whatever, your local church. And then it starts to open the door to greed and covetousness, which is also in this passage, right? You're not supposed to be covetous. Paul also says in Acts 20, I have coveted no one's silver or gold. And that's the verse right before he says he's labored night and day. So the idea...
Sorry, I was about to sneeze.
No worries.
But I don't think I can.
So the idea is that if you do not have another way to make money or you do not have a work outside of the church, you naturally are going to be more vulnerable to being covetous towards other people's possessions because now it's their possessions that provide for you. So you want their stuff. And it's a very dangerous place to be. But if you're like Paul, like Jesus, like the other apostles, and you have another way to make money outside of the church, then that puts you in a position where you are not looking for other people's silver and gold to provide for you. You can appreciate their gifts without it making you covetous or greedy. And that's the safe place to be. And that's what the Bible encourages leaders to be, where it encourages them to be.
Because you said you're giving a tithe message. And in his heart, the pastor is thinking, man, we really need to get tithe or else I'm not going to get my salary this month or whatever, or the church can't keep its lights on.
Or the staff.
Or the staff.
Whatever. Yeah, whatever.
And then, he's now he's literally thinking, okay, hey guys, donate. But in his heart, he's like, we really need this money. Mm-hmm. The way you don't have that practically is by having enough money. Mm-hmm. Because it wouldn't really be possible to not have a thought about money if you literally need the money.
Right.
So you just shouldn't need the money?
Yeah, that would be best case scenario. You should never be in a position where you need other people's giving for you to survive. Unless, and this is a very important distinction, unless you are in the situation Paul talked about, where you are a constantly traveling apostle that Jesus also similarly talks about in Luke chapter 10, where you don't have a single place where you lay your head. You're always traveling to do ministry, specifically as an apostle, and you're in a position where you're actually not able to work in any other way. That's the situation where Paul said that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel, and that's the context in which Jesus said to his disciples that he sent out 2 by 2 in Luke 10, don't bring any money with you because the worker is worthy of his wages. Mm-hmm. The issue is that sometimes preachers will take those verses and they'll pull them out of their context and say, this means anybody in ministry should be paid from the gospel, like all of their living, right? But in context, that's not what Jesus and Paul were talking about. If you actually read the type of person that they're saying doesn't need to have extra money with them because their labor in the gospel provides for them, is the situation where you're a constantly traveling, persecuted apostle, where you would literally be like impoverished, starving, if there wasn't an additional way for people to provide for you, because you could not work, right?
Why couldn't you work?
In certain seasons, I shouldn't say permanently, but in certain seasons of time. And the reason, if you also read Luke 10, was because you're literally, what Jesus said to do is, with all your time, go from house to house, is what Jesus said to do. And you shouldn't bring money with you, because he said, in going from house to house, you're going there to preach the gospel, and you stay in the homes of the people that you convert. And they feed you with their food, because you're constantly moving around. And so Paul does the same thing. Like, he goes to these cities. He goes into, like, the house of Lydia, the house of the, Philippian jailer, right? And, like, that's how they did it, Luke 10 style. Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Silas, like, they would go and preach. People would get saved. They would go into the houses of the people that they were traveling with. And the only time you see Paul not doing that was when there was no giving at all. Like, nobody was providing for him, just by happenstance. And so then he would stop and stay in a place for a longer period of time, like in a single city or what have you. He would make tents, and like this is in Acts chapter 18, he'd make and sell tents every day of the week, and then only would be preaching on the Sabbath. So that's like a situation where, which is what most preachers are in, if we're honest, like the ministry is one day a week.
Yeah.
And then all the other days of the week they should work, and Paul was working, right? So in a case where you are in one place, you work to make your money, and then you do the ministry on the days that are available, which is what Paul did in one case. And then there's other cases like Acts 16 or 13 through 16 where he couldn't do that. And it was just constantly, like Luke 10, traveling in people's homes. And there was not a possibility for him to like stop and stay in one place and work and live in the same house,
Yeah.
So, and then there's other cases. This is also in Acts where Paul stayed with one guy. I think it was Aquila and Priscilla. He stayed in Aquila's home, and they had the same trade. So he stayed in his house for a longer period of time and worked, right? So like some cases that was more possible, some cases it wasn't. So if you're like Paul, you're that guy. Like you're that type of apostolic ministry, then we can talk about preaching the gospel and living from the gospel. But if you're the pastor, the elder of a local church, Paul speaks to you in Acts 20 and says you should be laboring to support the weak. So the pastor is not in the apostolic ministry situation, so he's not qualified in context to make his entire living from the gospel without needing another form of work.
Yeah, the importance of those scriptures you bring up is because people take them out of context.
Right.
I see. So, man, to not, and I guess it's important to note that this is qualifications for a leader. So, essentially, to boil down what you said, in order to be a leader, you have to have enough money to be a pastor and provide?
Well, I'll put it this way. In order to be a pastor of a church, the requirement is you cannot be greedy for money. Is it possible for somebody that is still lacking some money to not at all be greedy? Yes. But I would say it's a very, 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 very rare type of person to be in that position and not have some greed. So to be extra sure that you, for certain, are not greedy for money, you should have enough money outside of the church to be able to pastor without needing other people's generosity. That's where I think you should be, because it's the safest place to be. But if you're not in that position, and you don't have a lot of money, and you're still working on your own work, and you want to be a pastor, it's okay, but I would say it's dangerous.
Well, what that reminds me of is the situation where someone's like, oh, the Lord will provide because, they need money. And they're like, not greedy.
Mm-hmm.
But then they don't work, or like they're not diligent with their time. Is that an example of greedy for money, or is that something else?
I would say it is still. Or if it's not greed, it's at least laziness, which is kind of another issue. Like, but there's even Proverbs, like the Bible, there's literally a proverb that says the lazy man covets all day long, which is greed, right? The soul of a lazy man desires and has nothing, right? So a lazy person is going to be at least vulnerable to greed. But if we just take the proverb at face value, it says you are greedy, like you are covetous if you're lazy, right? So a person that's in the situation where, the Lord will provide, but then they're not doing anything to work to gain that provision, then they're just being lazy. And it's also a misunderstanding of what the Bible says about how the Lord provides. Like, God provides through our work. That's how God provides for us. In fact, he provides you with work. Like, that is God's provision, is the work that he gives you, know. And Jesus himself even said, consider the birds of the air for how God provides for them. And you'll notice that the birds are constantly moving around. Like, the early bird gets the worm. Like, even that statement is attesting to how God provides for the birds. He provides them with the worms and with the bugs and so on and with the fruit, but they fly around and go find it early in the morning. So they're still working. They're not just sitting there in their tree or their nest waiting for food to fall on them or for other birds to come give them food. Like, that's not how birds do it. All the other animals, like, look to the ant, you sluggard, in Proverbs, they're constantly working, and they don't need somebody constantly looking over their shoulder to make them do something, So the idea in Scripture is that the way that God provides is through work, and him providing work is him providing for you. If you do not work and you are not diligent, you are lazy, Proverbs assures you that you will be poor, you will be impoverished, you will be desperate, you will be lacking. So laziness and praying for God to provide is covetousness that the Bible promises will make you poor. But you being diligent while praying for God to provide for you and then working is how you trust in God to provide for you. So I can't really see any possibility scripturally for a person to say, like, the Lord will provide and then not do anything about it,
So to look at this really practically, if you're a pastor of a local church, do your pastoral duties on Saturday and Sunday and Wednesday nights, and then get a full-time job, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent way to do it. Yeah. I mean, so, some pastors might say, but it takes like so much time to, prepare for teachings or whatever. Or I also meet with people. We have staff meetings and so on, And I get it. I understand that preparing teachings takes time. I understand that staff meetings sometimes take time. But I think it's up to a church and a staff and eldership and a community to think about what they can do to not get bogged down by so much busy work that's not actually productive for the kingdom, and focus on the things the Bible says pastors ought to do. And just as a personal example, like, I teach 5 times a week, if you include this podcast, right? We have this weekly podcast. I teach weekly on Sundays. I teach weekly on Saturdays. I teach weekly on Thursdays, and I teach weekly on Tuesdays. So that's 5 times a week I have to prepare a teaching, or at least this one is more conversational, so there's not a lot of preparation besides regular study. But at least 4 times a week I have a prepared teaching that I have to study for. And that doesn't take up so much of my time. Like, I can still work. I can still do other things, I can still have meetings with fellow leaders in our church community, on a periodical basis. And all of us are able to work, like, it's not a problem. But we've also structured our church in such a way that makes that possible. So I would ask the pastor or leader in that situation that you just brought up, are you able to restructure the church enough that you have the freedom to work? And at the very least, make your responsibilities as a pastor leaner so that you have more time to work. Those would be the two things that I would bring up, or just at least have a side hustle, like at least do something, that allows you to make some extra money. Because I don't think it's biblically faithful for a pastor to just like, oh, all I do is a ministry and then have nothing else. Like nothing else that you do to make money. Like that to me, for a pastor specifically, I don't see any biblical support for that if you read in context. Yeah.
Someone who's focusing on just leading the flock, giving the teachings, you should have enough time to work. At least a side hustle.
I think if you're doing it biblically, you will.
Yeah.
If you're a pastor, right? We're not talking about the
apostle.
The apostle, Luke 10, Book of Acts apostle. We're not talking about that. We're talking about an elder of a church, pastor of a church. You do have time to work. And if you don't, something's wrong with the way the church does things, because it just doesn't, especially if you have a big staff with shared responsibilities, Yeah,
delegate.
Delegation, Some people say pastors are small churches are the busiest. I do think that's actually true. If in small, meaning like there's only one or two or three elders that actually like are doing pastoring, it does take a lot of time. But in that case, you need to hire more leaders or get more leaders. I wouldn't say hire. Hire is the wrong word, but get more leaders.
Get some volunteers.
You got to be able to work.
I'm sure, dude, if you're working too, you probably can afford more part-time staff or something.
Yeah.
Because then now you don't have to be paid as much from the church. Okay, that horse is dead and obliterated. We're done with half the verse in 46 minutes. Okay. So, we're not violent, but we're gentle. We kind of already... Did we talk about gentle in the last verse?
We did talk about it a little bit. Well, we got into it.
What is doesn't the last verse say gentle, or what does it say?
No, it just says...
Of good behavior.
Of good behavior, and then I think we referenced being gentle. This is a good one. We have talked about it before, so I'll keep it real short. But gentleness is not about being like super soft-spoken all the time. Gentleness is having the self-control to give a person who's in sin less than what their sin deserves.
I see.
Right. It's the ability to have restraint, essentially. Like God says he's slow to anger. Right? And it even says he does not punish us according to what our iniquities deserve. So, even in rebuke, even in punishment, even in church discipline, you have restraint. That's what gentleness is ultimately about.
Where'd you get that definition from?
We've talked about this before. But,
did we?
Basically Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus is always gentle, but he was also harshly rebuking people all the time.
Yeah, true.
With restraint. It's controlled rebuke. Controlled discipline is what gentleness is about. As a parent, like when you discipline your child as a parent, like if you spank your kids, if you can be fully in control of your emotions and discipline, you are gentle.
That's a good example.
Right? But if you are, I'm so mad, I want to spank this kid, that's not gentle, obviously. Right? Yeah.
Even like raising your voice.
Yeah, even raising your voice. Yeah. Unless you're deciding intentionally for a specific reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's so good actually, because if you're basically doing anything without control, you're not being gentle. You're actually being violent at that point, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, it's actually another good example of violence. It's just like yelling.
Yeah, you can really think about it like to add in the layer of soft-spokenness or niceness, you might say. Gentleness does require knowing the person in front of you, what they need, and being able to be soft-spoken if you need to be. You know, that's also being gentle. But some people don't respond to you being soft-spoken and nice. And you got to remember that as a leader, you know, like everybody's a little bit different. Some people need you to speak softly and sometimes even show a little bit more meekness to them. Other people need you to stare in their eyes and talk real to them, you know, like some people need that. Some people need sometimes you to raise your voice, you know, and you have to be able to know that and control your emotions, master them enough that you can decide without an emotional reaction to do whatever is needed for a person. You know, that's gentleness. Yeah.
That's deep. Okay. What's next?
That's pretty good.
Wow. Good work.
Not quarrelsome. We kind of talked about that.
Yeah, that means just not arguing.
Don't argue with people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not over theology, not over anything, especially not with your wife. You know, not covetous. We talked about that. You're not going to be greedy.
Well, what's the difference between covetousness and greedy?
First thing that comes to mind is greedy is about always wanting more than what you have. Covetous is wanting what's someone else's. So, you know, being covetous, wanting other people's money, whereas being greedy could be you never have enough.
So, I see, yeah, like as a leader, you might want what your congregation has.
Right.
Which is like a terrible example.
Yeah. I mean, there's even, you know, shout out to Mike Winger, great YouTube channel. He just put out a video. I'm not going to get into it, but it's like a 6-hour long video about basically he's exposing some what's called cover-up culture and sin and stuff in a big ministry out there, big charismatic ministry. Right. Is the purpose of the video. Ultimately, I think he's doing it in good faith to warn people. But he's got one section in there where he talks about this common flaw of ministries giving special favor and attention to the really wealthy people that are in their ministry to try to garner their donations, right? So that would be like a covetousness issue if that's actually going on, where you specifically want the person who's really rich to be close to you to try to win their favor and ultimately their money. That would be covetousness because it's not your money, it's theirs, but you wanting it is a covetousness issue.
You wanting it for the ministry.
Yeah.
Because...
Which, for yourself,
I mean, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, you have a salary.
Yeah. Yeah.
The reason I say for the ministry, it's like, in quotations, for the ministry.
Right.
Meaning, that's your excuse for having a really good relationship with the rich people because they're going to give the ministry more money, so it's like you're helping God, but you're just being covetous.
It's very easy to lie to yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
Like, is there a situation where, donations help the ministry? Yes, but the job of a ministry is to serve the people and to give more than you take, give more value than you take. And if you're always needing to get people to give you money, I don't know. It gets kind of iffy because you run the risk of it being motivated by selfish gain.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking of the verse in 1 Peter that's like, why would you treat the rich people?
Yeah.
Sit over here and poor people sit on the floor.
That's a great point. Yeah, like, James 2.
Yeah. Oh, is that James?
James 2. Yeah.
I'm thinking of 1 Peter.
Yeah. Yeah, you got a great point. Yep. That you don't give more favor to the rich person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then you're coveting.
You're coveting. Yeah.
You're coveting what the rich people have, and you're not coveting what the poor people have.
I mean, Proverbs says the rich has many friends.
True.
And so if you want to be one of the many friends that the rich person has, very easily you could just be motivated by covetousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think we covered covetousness pretty well already.
Yeah. I think we did. I think it's a good way to summarize it to just say like covetousness is wanting other people's stuff. Greed is never having enough. And always wanting more.
The way you avoid both of those things is having enough.
Having enough outside of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
All right. Next verse is awesome.
Not covetous. Oh, nice. Verse 4.
We did it.
We need to have like some confetti on the screen and audience clapping. Thanks, guys.
We have 5
It was
minutes
hard
to
work.
get through
We
this
did
verse.
it. We did it together.
How long are we in right now?
45 minutes.
Okay, we got 15.
Yeah.
We got 15. Okay, cool.
One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence.
Epic verse.
This is, okay, so first of all, super directly connected to the previous verse about not being greedy and covetous, because in order to rule your own house well, you have to financially provide for it.
True.
And if you're like, my family's poor because we're pastors, you're not ruling your house well. So you're disqualified for a second reason
Oh, wow.
from being a pastor, which is you're not ruling over your house well.
I didn't even think about that.
I didn't either.
What's the verse? If you don't provide for your own household, you're worse than an unbeliever.
Yeah, 1 Timothy 5:8.
Yeah, that's
If you
exactly
don't
the same.
provide for your own, you've denied the faith and are worse than an unbeliever.
Wow.
Do we want somebody who's worse than an unbeliever pastoring a church?
Yikes.
Yeah.
So one level is just having enough money to feed them and have a good what level do you need to have to be considered well in the money?
Financially speaking?
Yeah.
Well, biblically, if you read what the Bible says about provision, it's that your family is well fed with healthy food, quality food. You provide financially by making sure there's always increasing savings, which is about stewardship of your money. And your family is well clothed and housed. So you know, you have healthy food, you don't have a house and clothes that are falling apart, and you're able to save money.
Okay, yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah.
Save and invest. Steward.
You're not paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
That's actually a really good distinction because a lot of people are in that.
Yeah. Paycheck to paycheck is just not good provision because anything unexpected happens financially, it could ruin you. You know, that's why it's dangerous. So you just have to make sure that there's always growth so that you're never in a position of the possibility of being financially ruined if an emergency happens, you know.
Okay, interesting. And then it also mentions, can you go back to the verse? It says, having his children in submission with all reverence. So, I mean, this is my first thought. It's like classic to have a pastor's kid go off the deep end. And,
Classic.
you know, I hate saying that because obviously I'm like a young person with a 1-year-old, so I'm nowhere near that.
Right.
But my question is like, is that an example of this? Or is that something completely different?
So yes, some people have different interpretations of this. Some people think that if you have kids still living in your house, that they need to be submissive and even believers for you to be a pastor. But if you have kids that have moved out and they're not living in your house, then it doesn't matter anymore.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly where I stand in that distinction, but I think for sure, if you have kids living in your house, they need to be submissive to you. So you need to have control over your kids if they're living in your house. If they're not living in your house and they're moved out and they're, you know, they have a more profligate life and they're not, they've, you know, gone off the deep end, right? It's like maybe not as critical as if they were living in your house, but I think it still matters. And if I were, say, interviewing people that, you know, we were considering to be additional leaders like in our community, and they were an older adult and had older children who were adults and were, you know, still rebellious and not following Jesus, would that be a stain on their name and their family? Yeah.
Dang.
It might not fully disqualify them in my eyes, but it does create a problem because how can you be the leader trying to help other families with their kids who are unbelievers if you can't help yourself? You know, I'll put it this way. Okay, I think I've kind of landed on where I stand with this in this very moment. Before I didn't quite know. If you have a child who's an adult, out of the house, not a believer, not following Christ, but you know how to actively help that child, and there is progress in the relationship and them growing towards a believer, or at least growing towards a better person to start, I would consider that a qualified situation because you know what to do and it's working, right? But if you're not doing anything, or you don't know what to do, or it's getting worse, or at least not getting better, that probably, at least for me, I'd consider a disqualification, because then you're in a position where you can't help other families that have the same problem.
Because you're not helping your own.
Right. You can't help others if you can't help yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's ultimately the essence of the passage. I mean, it says in the following verse that if you don't know how to rule your own house, how can you take care of the church of God? So if you can't help yourself, you can't help other people. So any situation where you're not helping yourself and it's working, you shouldn't be helping other people. Therefore, you shouldn't be a pastor, you know.
What would you, I mean, I feel bad because what would you say to the person who's listening, who did their best with their kid, they went off the deep end, now this person, the father is a leader with their wife, you know, and their kid's like messed up, and now obviously like you said, it's a stain on them or whatever. Is it just like bummer?
Yeah, it is a bummer. There's two types of situations. So you have the situation where kids are young and they're not even, in some cases, they're too young to even decide to be a believer yet. And in that case, where they haven't reached what some people would call the age of accountability, it's more about just their submission, obedience-wise, not necessarily their faith in Christ yet when they're really young. Mm-hmm. But once they get old enough to be able to be a believer, it becomes especially important for them to be a believer or to be moving towards one. And that brings up the situation you mentioned, which is where kids, they're at this point, like you said, messed up, right? What do you do? Well, number one, if it's a family where while you were unbelievers, you had kids, you raised your kids poorly because you were not a believer and didn't know better, and your kids are still rebellious, you become a believer, later down the road you become a pastor, and your kids are still rebellious, I would have more grace for that situation because you raised your kids while you were an unbeliever. But then if while you're a believer, or after becoming a believer, you're still doing nothing for your unbelieving children, I personally would consider that a disqualified situation because you're not doing anything about it, right? If you raise your kids while you are, at least in your knowledge, a believer, and you still raise them in a way that you thought was your best effort, and they did not become believers, I would take personal responsibility for the mistakes made and continue to work on helping your kids come to know Christ. Mm-hmm. So regardless of the situation, whether you raise your kids as an unbeliever or a believer, I think the responsibility is still the same, and that is to take ownership of what you did wrong and start doing what's right for your kids.
That, I think that clears it up. It's the past is gone.
Yeah.
Well, what are you doing now?
What are you doing now?
So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's someone out there who's like mad at us because what they did. But it's like, we're not judging you for what you did. We're just saying, okay, what are you going to do now?
Right. That's a great point. Yeah. Because we all only know what we know, and we make mistakes. We mess up because we don't know often. And we're just saying, now that you do know, do something about it, rather than just like groveling in the regret of what you did in the past and doing nothing. Start doing something now.
Yeah.
Like, I would really respect if there was a pastor or a leader who knew he had a kid or two that were in rebellion, but he was like blood, sweat, and tears trying to help his kids, and it was working and doing well, and he was finding ways to help them come closer to Christ. I'd respect that, and I'd consider that a situation where I would want that guy to be a pastor over families that are in a similar situation, because he can both relate to them and help them.
Yeah. That's deep. That's so true. That'd be fruit of a real leader.
Yep. And this clarification would specifically be for kids that are outside of the house.
Yeah.
Not living in your house. If they are living in your house, they do need to be in submission and obedience. You know, Titus's version of this teaching about qualifications for elders says they also shouldn't be unbelievers. So the Greek word says, I forget the word. But there's two words that Paul uses in Titus for this condition your children need to be in. One of them is not disobedient to their parents, and the other one is not rebellious, as in the form of not being an unbeliever, if you look at the meaning of the Greek word. So some people would argue that they have to be believers. And I would say if your children are, again, too young to make that decision, they need to at least be submissive and obedience-wise. But if they're old enough to make that decision, that either need to be believers or are knowingly, evidently moving towards becoming a believer in order for you to be qualified to be a pastor. If your kids are moving away from being a believer after they've been old enough to make that choice, then you shouldn't be in leadership.
One thing I just thought of is if they're not old enough to be a believer, but they need to be submissive. I mean, this is sort of alluded, but I figured it's worth bringing up. You should discipline them like a leader needs to discipline their kids at a young age.
Yes.
So that they are submissive.
Yep.
Because if you have a toddler running around who's like talking back to you at church, that's like a terrible example for other parents. Right.
Yeah. Some people would think you get around that by throwing them in a kids ministry so they can run around out of everyone's sight.
Yeah. But then the people come in your home because you're hospitable and then they see it happen there.
Which, of course, is a bad scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Man. That's something that we don't,
it's a high standard.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's a high standard for people who are in leadership, pastors. It's a high standard. And, it doesn't get talked about enough. Your kids, you need to have control over your kids, and you need discipline. You need to spank your kids to keep them in submission when they're little, of course. And that's what works. With my kids, they do well when we have people in our home.
They are obedient.
Because we spank them. That's just what works. So, I don't know. I think we covered that.
Yeah, we did. How much time do we have?
2.5 minutes. I would also add this to, make it even a little more controversial, ruling your house well, having your kids in submission. Also includes your wife. Like if you're a man and you're a pastor, people need to see that your wife is in submission to you, and that you're not like constantly arguing with your wife and your wife is nagging you and contending with you. And, that's not an example you want in your house. And that's not ruling over your house either. And it actually is I think it is the responsibility partly of a man to be helping his wife be in submission to him. Because you can do it in a way that's loving. Like Ephesians 5 says, husbands, love your wife. You can love your wife into helping her be more submissive to you, because that's an important part of ruling your house well. Your wife, of course, also has a part to play in it because it's her choice. But that's another important part of this.
Yeah, like part of ruling your house well is helping your wife. Like basically being so loving that she wants to submit to you. It's not like being a tyrant and like giving her commands.
Right.
That
exactly.
doesn't help her.
That's not going to help her want to. But the thing is, like, is a wife still responsible to submit regardless? Yes.
Yeah.
But if you want to make it easier for her, being more loving will help her want to at least submit to you more.
Yeah. And that's your responsibility as a leader.
Yes.
To help. Because if she's not, then A, you shouldn't be a leader, and B, you should help her so that you can. Mm-hmm. If this was the last thing that you needed to do, I would do everything I could to be loving to my wife.
Yeah.
Man, it really seems like it's interesting. There's two full verses about, no, more than two. He mentions a few other things about the household. Mm-hmm. And that's not something you really talk about much or even see. At least in my experience growing up. I don't know what it's like for like a a middle-sized church, like 100 to 200 people. But I mean, when you get into like the mega church scene, you're not seeing the home of anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not even seeing the home of your small group leader versus, the pastor of the 5,000 congregation. Like, man, it just seems like if you're not seeing the family life of your leaders, that's a big problem.
It's a huge problem, and I think that's one of the reasons why this passage has been taken as suggestions rather than requirements, because people have this thought that, like, well, nobody really sees this part of your life anyway. So, yeah, it's a good idea to be in that case, but it's really not that big of a deal if you still got some problems in your house,
Yeah.
But that's not the attitude we're supposed to have.
Man, like, imagine you're, like, devoted to this church for, like, 2 years. And then you're like, go over to his house for dinner. And, his kids are like disrespectful. And he's given to wine or something. Gosh, that would mess you up.
Mm-hmm.
Because you would be like, oh, this guy is my example. So, like, I can do this. Man.
Mm-hmm.
Or on the contrary, you're like, oh, this is not biblical at all. These past 2 years, I shouldn't have been listening to this person. That'd be even worse. That'd be devastating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Well, 3 verses today.
3 verses. Thanks for hanging in there.
Half
all
a sentence.
All of our listeners and those of you who are watching or listening. Much appreciated. This has been a really fun study. I've liked going through 1 Timothy 3.
Yeah, this is deepest so far ever.
It's super deep.
I don't even know what the heck the rest of the chapter is about.
Yeah, I might take a audio transcription or take the audio of this, transcribe it, and get like some like notes, because just the understanding I've gained from talking about it on top of what I had has been really helpful just for me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So. Can I summarize really quick?
Mm-hmm.
As a leader in a church, not an apostle, you should probably get a job, because it's really easy to be greedy if you don't have a job.
And covetous.
Because now, in order for you to pay your bills and eat food, you need donations. And if you need donations, when you're up there giving the tithing sermon, you're going to be thinking in the back of your mind, probably, I need these people's money because I'm, broke, or in order to save my money or whatever, in order to do what I need to do, I need these people's donations. You shouldn't put yourself in that position. Mm-hmm. So the way you fix that is you get a job. And if you're disorganized and you're really busy in your church, delegate some stuff, get some volunteers, be a leader, and figure it out and get a job. Your house needs to be in order for you to be a leader, because other people are going to see that and look to your example and follow your example, because you're a hospitable, you're a leader, they're going to be in your home. If your wife and your kids aren't submitted, then you're a really bad example. And your example needs to be blameless because, again, you're a leader. That's basically all we talked about.
Mm-hmm. That was an excellent summary.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Man. All right.
Call that good.
Like and subscribe. I was going to say comment down below, but we're going to be in 1 Timothy for the next 3 episodes. So. All right. Peace.